So what we're going to talk about today are different processes that we use, different corner systems, how the logs go together, how they're sealed, the different corner systems, like I said, with you've seen the vertical corner, the button pass. Well, how do they go together? How does this work? And I'll call it the old days. We used to have to, we primarily just did a button pass corner and a vertical corner. But as a builder, we'd actually have to make those cuts on site. So we would be coming up with these templates and making the router joints and all that type of stuff. So we'd literally have to do that on site. It would be our responsibility as a builder to make those cuts tight, look good, and all that type of thing. So about 5 years before I got out of the business, maybe 10, they decided to buy all this fancy equipment and make all the cuts for us. So made it all easy. Now I don't do it anymore. So, but anyways, being able to have all these different cuts and all this stuff taken care of ahead of time. And over the years, we've just come up with solutions on keeping things tight and efficient and well put together. So what we're going to look at here first is our most reasonable corner, is our vertical corner. So when we look at a vertical corner, basically this one here is about a 10 by 10 and it's square. And like Todd had mentioned earlier, we like to use the wood splines. The wood splines kind of move and expand and contract like the other wood products, where if you put a plastic in there over time, it might get brittle, get a little movement, it might crack, might create a seal failure later in time. But the 2x4s and the products that we like to use more standard stuff so that it's easily accessible, keeps it more reasonable for you. Tying the things together, what we're trying to do with the log home situation, if you think of a log home, you've got really one set of chances to make it tight. So you've got, on a regular home, you've got the stud walls, you got the plywood sheeting on the outside, you got the house wrap, you got the siding, you got the insulation on the inside, you got the plastic, you got the drywall. So you got 5 or 6 different processes there that's going to keep the wind from blowing through. You set 2 logs on top of each other. If they're not sealed tight day one, you might put some caulk in there, you might stick some chinking in there. But if things move, that opens that up and becomes drafty. So we're trying to eliminate the fact of the movement, and then of course keeping everything tight as it goes through. So it's very important to make sure that these things are put together correctly to begin with. Now we've got a few different rows up here. Now what we're looking at on this lower level here is actually our floor system. So it's our subfloor system. We're covering up the subfloor system with a 1x12 pine board, a couple different layers of it, and then cut down a little bit. And then basically the first row of log everywhere, we make this saw cut in the bottom, and then there's this piece of flashing that goes in underneath here. So any water coming down the face of the log is going to hit that flashing and then go out. It doesn't go in. Because somewhere along the line, we had a log home built, or somebody did, and instead of the water running out, it ran in. So then we came up with a solution, okay, we got to put that flashing in there. So whether or not this is the pine boards like this, or maybe it's cultured stone, we use that same process there. We can also cover up this lower level actually with quarter log as well. The quarter log matches the full log identically. We can have whatever corner style on it, so we can make it look like that log starts directly from the foundation. But we're not actually tying the log directly to the foundation per se. We're tying it to the floor system, which is tied to the foundation. Depending on the area in the country in which it's built, there's different threaded rods that go through and can tie into those bolts and stuff and whatnot. But that joint right there is a really important one. It is on your current home or a conventional home. Now basically what they're doing here, actually bring that back out once, you'll see the end joint here has this cut that's made back there in that shop. So that wherever we're butting up against a corner joint like that, any butt joints, or up against any windows or doors, that's the cut that we have. They have a weather strip on each side here, and then on the face of that spline, it's like you see here. So when they're bringing that log into it, they're going to screw down, but they're also going to screw over to that vertical log, which is going to make that a real tight fit. There's absolutely no chance of anything getting through there. So go ahead and shoot that one down. The nice part about the milled log is they're all pretty much exactly the same size. And then basically what he's doing now, he's going to draw it to the corner and make it tight. You can see how that sucks that down really nice and tight. Now, the slow speed, variable speed drill like that is what's needed to put those screws in. A fast speed drill will wear itself out almost immediately, and you're able to kind of control the drill as it's bringing it down. So it's very important. We used to nail them together with like a 3-pound maul and spikes, and then you'd get that baby almost down and it just wouldn't go, and you're sitting there pounding away on that log, and it's like, what do? You know, then you got to cut that thing apart, pull it apart, and put a different one down. Here you can back the screws out, and it's a much easier deal. But the screw-in process it really pulls things together nicely. So that's very important. And like I said, the control of putting the log in the correct location. We're supplying the weather stripping, we're supplying the screws, we're supplying all the caulks and stains and finishes so that everything is put together in a fashion in which we want to. The cool part about us selling everything for the home is we're able to design everything into the home. So we're able to give you all those processes. So all the way through, even running those interior walls in and stuff, because we're selling you all the finishes and stuff, we can give you all the details. And by building the homes and putting all this stuff together, we've got our processes in place that really make things work out smoothly. The weather strip that he is using there is a foam that it expands and contracts but never really gets hard. So when you're using log products like the caulks and the stains and the weather strips and the screws even, they've been time tested, you know, and we're constantly looking at different products and making sure that what we're supplying is the right product. I've had different screws that just didn't draw that log down. And I'll call up somebody, you know, like Chris and say, hey, you know, these certain brand of screws they're just not sucking the log down. Every 5th one seems like it just spins out. So the builder's input on everything is very important. The weather strips, maybe it doesn't unroll good, or maybe it just seems like it's a messy product to work with in the caulking. So right now what we're looking at is what we call a button pass corner. Here's our same 2x4 spline. So we're not sending these little blocks there, but we have material set aside that the builder actually just takes and cuts them 7 1/8 inches long and just a little bit short of the top of the log. We're looking at the button pass corner here at the side. That's actually the top there. So the piece that's going into it is basically forming that 2x4 spline there. And it's amazing how when we used to router them and put them together, we could get them to fit pretty darn tight, and then we would drill a hole in between them, and then we would drive a dowel down. We'd shoot some caulk in there and drive a dowel down, and then that would create the tightness of it. But sometimes when you're drilling that dowel in, it would actually push the corner apart a little bit. This seems to actually draw the logs together when you're putting that spline in, which is really a neat deal. Now, when I'm putting the spline in, or putting the logs together, actually, I'll caulk up this joint, and in here on both sides. And then before I put that spline in, they're fastened together, but I shoot a little extra caulk in there too. And then when I put this spline in, it actually just soaks up any gaps that are in there. And there's, like I said, absolutely no chance of that getting any air infiltration through there. So that's really a important deal. The weather strip is nice just because it's really, if there's any point in time where there's any movement or something that happens, that's always there. But there's 5 different points to seal. So basically we've got the weather strip. We put a bead of caulk on each side of that weather strip as we're installing it. And then after it's stained on the inside and outside, they get another bead of caulk on the inside and outside. So there's 5 different points of seal there. So that's very important to note. Now, I was part of the generation that we used to build a lot of air-dried homes back in the day. And the expansion, contraction, the quality of log, like I had maybe mentioned to a few of you in the kiln area, we didn't know where they were going to crack necessarily or how they were going to twist until they're fully dried. The kiln drying process makes them very light. You know, if I were to grab a wet log and hold it up like that, I'd be, you know, huge. But anyways, no, it's just one of those things where we know what's going on with it as far as what twist it's going to have, if it has any, or the cracks and all that stuff. So it makes life very good. But we get a lot less expansion and contraction today, and I see a lot less failure in the caulkings and the finishes because of the kiln drying process. So that's a big deal. So having everything kind of pre-cut for you, as far as the corners pre-cut, the ends trimmed, all that type of stuff is important. We still have to cut the logs to length. So if you have a run of logs that is 40 feet long and you got 3 different logs in there, we still, somewhere along the line, we're going to have to make a cut. So as a builder, we have to come up with one way or another to actually make that cut. So I actually preferred in using a 10-inch skill saw, and I would slide a box over the end of the log, screw that box to the log, and then make 2 cuts with my skill saw. And then I would hit the end with the belt sander just to make it smooth, and then I would make that dado joint. I'd have to recreate that joint for where it was butting up against a window or a door or 2 logs going together. But I always tried to put my factory cuts together because they're perfect. So then I would make my hand cuts up against windows and doors, that type of thing. But most of the tools that we use as part of the trade are very much common stuff that you buy, and that's something that we try to make things as builder friendly, as homeowner friendly as we can. We're, like I said, we're not supplying the We're not supplying products that you can't, if we run short of something, we can always adapt and get more. You'll also note that with the kiln drying process in our logs, we don't have any mechanical settler tighteners or anything that you have to do as a homeowner. You're not going to have to go back and tighten your home up in 6 months to stop that air from flowing in. One thing I'd like you to look at if you go in the model home is the cabinets are attached to the log wall on the outside, they're attached to the drywall wall on the inside, and they're attached together. 14 or 15 years ago we built that model and they were attached together. And they have moved identically. There's absolutely no cracking or no issues between the two. So that's something to note, that as a homeowner you're not having to do any maintenance to make this home stay performing the way it's supposed to. Now we're going to be looking at the Dovetail Corner here. What my brother Todd had mentioned earlier today is that the dovetail is not a true, let's say, cabinet dovetail. If this were a true dovetail, this joint here would actually slide back this way. So when you look at that, this inch that sticks out here would actually be going back to the log. So what we did here is we made a flat spot that actually angles upward then. So any water that gets on the outside of that log is actually shed away. And he said there's a company out there, which I won't name, he said they actually have a real dovetail. And I'm like, really? You know, how could you do that? And it's been a company that's been around forever. So I can't remember where I was. I think it was Kansas City. I'm in Kansas City doing a show with Jan, and I'm looking at this log display across from me, and I'm like, that's the company. So when I had some time, I called up Brother Todd, and I mentioned the name, and he said, Dovetail Corner, right? And I said, yep, exactly. So anyways, you know, it might work okay for a while, but I do know that water has a tendency to beat you up. So we're using a little different flashing here, just a little bit wider flashing, because we have the ability to have a little wider flashing there, or a weather strip. And basically what we're doing is we're going over the top, wrapping down both ways, and then that next piece that fits up over the top is you know, going to sit down on there. We don't want to crush it completely, but we want to crush it some. So basically one's just lapping over the top of the other. The Dovetail Corner here has the same situation here with the flashing, and then with the dovetail and the saddle notch, you got a full one on this side and you got a half one on this side, so they alternate going up. So then the cutoff piece basically is your top row on the top edge. We've actually designed everything too where our logs end up finishing, that's generally a standard height stud wall. So let's say you go to the stud store, go to the lumber yard and you buy pre-cut studs and you put together your wall, that's going to end up to be 97 1/8. Well, our finished 8-inch full log wall is 97 1/8. So the builder doesn't have to grab all those studs and determine how long those studs are going to be. So it's something that maybe because we started out, my dad was a builder, I was a builder, and we're always dealing with builders, we try to make things as builder friendly as possible. I always tell people when we're talking about things, we'll talk about SIP panels, we'll talk about this, we'll talk about that, how efficient they are. And I think, man, it's more difficult because things are weird, you know. So we try to make things as consistent as possible and as consumer friendly and as builder friendly as possible, you know. But we try to make things as easy for people so that it's even not having to cut studs down to a different height because your wall heights are different. So basically we're just wrapping one over the top of each other, keeping the gaps consistent, and then basically we'll, like I said, the exterior stains that go on, and then the caulking finishes it off. So basically we work these logs all the way up, you know, to the top. And this next deal here, we're actually looking at what we call the saddle notch corner. Now the saddle notch corner, you know, like the dovetail, it's wrapping over each other. So we're going to go ahead and get that next row on. About every 2 foot on center. We got different parts of the country and different lengths of logs that we have to have different screw patterns, but we figure all that out for you. So each home is designed site specific. So it's designed for the area in which it's being built. Building in central Wisconsin is a lot easier than building in Santa Clara, California. So in there we've got different screw patterns, we got threaded rods going through everywhere, tying to the foundation because things shake out there, stuff like that. So, but every home is done site specific. Prior to this row going on, prior to any logs going on, just to back up and go talk about electrical a little bit. Obviously, wiring a log home might be a little more difficult or a lot more intimidating than just building a house and then running wires and stuff later. I always had the electrician, my homeowner, and myself kind of go through a plan on where everything's going to be, where our switches, where our outlet's going to be, and all that type of stuff. We would go around and we would snap all the lines on the floor because the floor system's down, then we're putting the log on top of it. So we snap all the lines where everything's going. We know where all the windows then are going. A lot of times we'll set the window or the door bucks immediately. We'll get them set in place. We pre-build these window openings that are designed. Now, here's a butt joint in the log. So basically, like I said, we're caulking up each one of these and inside both of them. And then he puts them together here. And I would, after it was screwed down, I would slide that spline down in between it. It actually just takes and just creates an unbelievably tight deal. So we're finding out where all the walls are going, where all the door openings are on the outside. And then what we do is we mark on the floor where we're going to have an outlet, where we're going to have a switch, and then we'll drill those holes as we're putting the logs up. So knowing that we had an outlet here, there would have been a mark on the subfloor where it was going. The log goes in exactly that right spot. And then I would make a drill down with about 1.25 inch drill bit down into the floor system. So I'm literally drilling down into the subfloor so you can get at it from the basement. And then the next row up, we're actually going to take, and we've got every builder does it a little bit differently. I have one of those boxes that I talked to you about that make my cuts. One of them has this jig for outlet. So I have a router that I make this cutout, and then I have a plunge router that drops in and puts that in. Okay, so basically what's happening is we're drilling that hole down through. At this point then, where that outlet is, I'm going to drill down and hit that other hole. And if I'm off just a hair, I can still get that wire up, or I auger it out a little bit, but it's very, very easy to do. Now, if you think about the outside of the house, how many outlets do you really have on there? There might be 15 on an average house. You might have 3 doorways going outside. So now we got to talk about switches and stuff like that. So, so the outlet part of it's actually pretty easy because the electrician will run his wire up, guy grabs it, has it out, drops another one in, goes over to the next outlet. So it really makes it just kind of a neat deal. So we're trying to take care of all the stress for the plumbing, heating, and electrical guys because we don't want them to have to try to figure it out on site. So it's already there, it's already in. Basically, we're just repeating row after row here, and we're going to get to a point where we're going to put a window frame in. I've had times in the past where somebody's missed a piece of flashing, where 2 different walls come together, a roof comes into a wall, stuff like that. And like I said, getting the same part again is the important thing, because all of a sudden you go to Menards or Fleet Farm or Home Depot or Lowe's and you try to pick up that half log siding, you're never going to find it, or try to, where am I going to get this full log? So, and that again too, where you're doing an addition or adding something on, it's very nice to be able to know that you can get all those same parts. So really the cool deal about all this is how well these corners fit together. It just astounds me every time I look at them, just because of having to make them, So continually, seal and wrap. And the way it works when they're going up is you're actually kind of working a section. You're not building logs all the way around and all the way around and all the way around. You kind of work in between corners and door openings. So if you have a vertical corner, you can work a whole wall and then move to the next one. So you're not moving your equipment around and all that type of stuff. Or if you're doing a saddle notch corner like this, obviously they're interacting, but maybe there's a patio door 15 feet away and a entry door the other way. So then I always work those sections, got everything up to a certain height, and then I would go around and finish everything off. So it really works pretty darn good there. Now, if the wood were wet, it would be very hard to make those cuts. You know, if you think about making a saw cut or something like that on wet wood, if anybody's ever cut treated lumber, yeah, it can really be binding and all that stuff. So it's important to have sharp tools and sharp equipment and dry lumber. So this here is a corner of our window buck system. So the window buck system is designed so that this is the same width darn near as the log. So they're pretty much identical. This 2x2 spline that we have on here mimics half of a 2x4. So we're making that 2x4 cut in the end of each of the logs. So basically what we're doing is we're setting this in place. There's weather strip underneath it and there's caulk underneath it. And then we normally screw these down to the log below it. So when that happens, then we'll take an angle brace and go in. We square them up so that the openings are square. And it's very important at this point to make sure you're putting the window in the right spot. So it's harder than heck to slide them over later. So, so that's a big deal. So when we actually put these together, we either caulk on both sides, depends on how good a cutter you are, or we use that weather strip on these faces. Now we put these saw cuts or kerfs in the window and door bucks. Reminds me of a story. I was told there was this grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter at Thanksgiving one time, and mom cut the middle one, cut both ends of the ham off. And the daughter says, "Mom, why do you always cut both ends of the ham off?" "Well, because my mom used to do that." Well, she was in the other room, maybe a little hard of hearing, didn't hear the conversation going on. So then they asked Grandma, why did you cut both ends of the ham off? And she says, "My pan was too small." So for generations, this is going on where they're cutting both ends of the ham off. So when I tell you that the saw kerf that we make in there is for movement, I don't think we get much movement anymore where we have to worry about that being able to slide or move around, but yet we're still going to cut both ends of the ham off just because it's easy to do. But it's definitely something that better safe than sorry. Over-engineering is better than under-engineering is the way we kind of look at it. I'd rather have a 3-ply header in there than a 2-ply that just makes it, because you might have those 2 years in a row where you got a lot of snow and all that stuff. So, so those window and door bucks, when they're put in, they're plumb and level and square and all that type of thing. So we're carrying the logs up even with those to keep all the walls straight. We're able to keep our corners vertical, okay, plumb and level, all that type of thing, very easy because they're interlocking within each other. But as we get on those long walls where you're just running logs, one can be tipped in a hair, one can be tipped out a hair. That's where the window and door openings help keep you straight. If we have a long wall, let's say from here to the wall there, maybe 16 feet, we would put what we call stiff backs up so that we can keep the logs tight to that all the way along, just to make sure that we're straight all the way through. Because when you're setting on top of that weather strip, it's rocking a little bit. So it's important to be able to keep things going the right direction. It's much easier to do it right the first time than it is redo it. And I tell you, once these things are caulked together, screwed together, you can pull the screws out the next day and try to pull those logs apart. It's like they have become one. You know, it's really amazing. But you can see how that spline fits in there, and that window fits in. So basically, getting everything, knowing where everything's going is very important. That wiring is, of course, very important. Now, the way the wiring works, if this were a door opening, a lot of times I'll drill that hole all the way up the logs and all the way up to the top so those wires can go, depending on what kind of light they're going to have and stuff. We've got that chase there. But we can also router in a groove behind the trim on the doors. So you're going to see, like we have over here, some wide trim around the windows. Sometimes those outlet switches are actually put right in the trim. So there's a box routed in behind it and then the trim over the top of it. Some people like to have their switch over here. Some people like to have it over here. So all that type of stuff, it's important that your builder and the homeowner are on the same page with the electrician and everybody kind of works through it. That's why the builder network that we have, the builders with their subcontractors they have, all that type of stuff is very important to have a good consistent crews and all that type of stuff. So log home building isn't for every builder. Track home builders are guys who punch out these homes and all that type of stuff. All of a sudden they start doing a log home. It takes a little more time, a little more thought. The guys that are nailing sheeting on and shingles and soffit and fascia and vinyl siding, they might not be the right guy to, you know, you get a corner done in a morning, you know, where you're up maybe to the windows or whatever the case may be. So, you know, you want to have people who are really care for their work. The other thing about log homes is what you're putting up there is what you're going to see forever. So guys sliding around on the top rows, shooting screws down with their big work boots, sliding themselves along. Yeah, I've had it. You know, and then you got to go back and clean it, that type of stuff. So the key is that everything you're doing with a full log home, you're going to see forever. So you want to make sure that you take your time, do things right, not having to have that iffy corner joint that you made on site that, yeah, it's close enough. You know, it's not a church, you know, or whatever the saying would be. Having that all pre-done is very important because there's no second chance to get that log to fit right and set right. So what we're looking at here then, that window there that we're putting in, now what we've got is we've got a window buck opening. We're basically attaching the window to that 2x8 buck. There's a nailing fin that goes around the window. Doesn't really matter what kind of window it is, they're all generally the same. So we're building those window and door bucks to the rough opening size, which Golden Eagle is very detailed about exactly where they go, exactly what the rough opening is. Our material is very detailed as far as what parts we're using for which window and door openings and how those window and door openings are put together. So we've gone through the process of putting the logs up, all the splines are together. Once the window's installed, we get the window plumb and square. We take and we measure over about 5 inches. And what we're doing here is we're making a saw cut around the window. So really just freehanding with a saw, with like a skill saw, and making the saw cut. The saw cut is a little deeper than the profile of the log. Our goal here is we want to take this flashing that Russ has there and slide it into the log, past that profile. So what he's going to do is, it's almost like shingling. You start at the bottom of the roof and shingle up, as compared to starting at the top and shingling down. So Russ is going to, on this here, he would silicone behind this, and then apply that bottom one to it. And then the side pieces go on. All this metal's pre-bent. It has to be cut to length on site, but it's pre-bent for the builder. So the bottom goes on, he's siliconing basically up the back of that all the way up the window. And the window is actually silicone to the window buck as well. And then, so then the top piece will go on. So any water, siliconed again all the way through to here, any water coming down is actually going to just continue right on through. There's no chance of any water getting in. Silicone to the window is silicone to the buck. And then this saw cut here, we're actually going to take, once this is in, we're going to take and we're going to caulk that. We're going to caulk all the way around that joint. And then the trim will end up going over the face of that. So what's happening here is we're creating an environment that keeps water out. You can literally go around our model home and pressure wash the windows and not blow water in. Now the reason why we came up with this system is because 50 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it was, you know, you'd have the right wind, the right rain, whatever the case. So we got to come up with a better way. And it was, I think Brother Todd that came up with the idea, hey, let's make this flashing. We'll just cover it up with trim, so no big deal, but let's do this and let's do this right. So we came up with this weather-tight window flashing system that really works well. Now you're looking, Russ is screwing those in. I like to use screws. Funny story, back in the day where there was no like screws for screwing stuff together, Dad used to take and cut the end of screwdrivers off. So we had all these screwdrivers laying around the house without ends on them. But he liked to screw stuff together. So it was, and then all of a sudden, you know, a lot of people screw, you know, like the logs or the windows and doors. You can always readjust it if you have to. But now what we got here is we made that saw cut up there in that other flashing so that we actually have this little piece of aluminum that slides in the top into a groove that's angled a little bit. So, and then that gets a bead of caulk along there. So any water coming down gets out over the face. So that's the key, is to not let water run back in anywhere. And you know, a company just selling you the logs or just selling you the logs and the trusses and not the windows, company selling you the logs, the windows, the trusses, maybe the roofing, they don't have to worry about all this stuff. You got to figure it out. You know, and if you were to go to, let's say, a lumberyard to go build a home and have the plans designed, they're going to draw to contractor specs. Well, there's really no detail in there. Everybody's got their own detail, their own way of doing things. And if you can imagine building a conventional home, and your home builder is, he's the guy who says, go over to this place and pick out this, go over to that place, pick out that, go talk to that person about the cabinets, run to the other side of town and pick out the plumbing. And then all these things got to be put together through the process. And all of a sudden you got the countertop, the vanity top from that lumberyard, but you got the faucet from the plumbing place, and the vanity's all siliconed in and stuff, and the plumber comes and he's got a 4-inch thing, but there's 8-inch holes there, and it's all of a sudden, now, do we get a new vanity top or do we get a new faucet? You know, there's so many things that go into this. Maybe your husband picks up the door stops and you pick up the lock sets because this place is a little cheaper and that place is a little cheaper. He brings home the shiny brass and you bring home the oil rub bronze, and then you happen to have silver hinges on your door, and it's like, wow, nobody will notice, you know. And so anyways, keep track of your ideas, keep track of your questions. If you have questions, by all means, you know, anybody here can answer them. Shoot us an email. Pinterest I like House, I like all those things for keeping your ideas. We actually have a folder on our website that you can keep track of things, different plans. You can get on there, log in and stuff like that, and you can say, hey, Rick or Jan or John or Justin. I'm the only sales guy with a different first letter. So anyways, and then I got brother Jay too. It's crazy. But anyways, if you put a plan in there and say, hey, give me a bid on that, or whatever the case, we have the ability to kind of work simultaneously with you. So we try to make things work out well. Every day we're adding more virtual tours and more pictures and photographs and stuff like that. So that's very nice to be able to virtually walk through a house. Somebody might have mentioned too, in the fall of the year we do a home tour. This year it's the fall. I think it's the 24th of September. We meet back here, we hop on a couple coach buses on Sunday, and we go look at 4 or 5 other homes in the area. And you'll see, you know, homeowner homes that aren't, you know, a model home, let's say, but just their home and why they did this and why they did that. It's nice to be able to get in and see some. And maybe you're in an area where that doesn't work and you want to build an Eagle Prowl 5 and you want to get in and see one. We might have something nearby that maybe you can get in and take a look at. So it's depending on where you are. You know, I know a lot of you are fairly Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and stuff like that, but we've got some other folks here from far away, and it's to get in and see some and know that we have this builder network, you know, 51 years in the making. You know, we've had, you know, a lot of great experiences, a lot of these guys, and I primarily built just Golden Eagle log homes. So I knew what was coming, I knew what to expect, and a lot of these guys, like I know you mentioned, Jeff, that, or maybe it was Chris, Dan Truckenbrod, one of our builders, that's all he does. He won't touch anybody else's stuff because it would confuse him. It would, you know, how do we do this? How do we do that? So thank you guys very much for your time and patience and coming to make the trip. So, all right, enjoy. Thank you.